Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. Today's episode is going to be a little interesting, and that is because when we look back at the original George magazines, it's clear that JFK Jr. was putting information into those magazines, whether it's foretelling or just warnings of the future, such as the Survival Guide to the Future. But there's someone who helped him create this magazine, and that is Michael Berman. Michael Berman was JFK Jr.'s co-founder of George Magazine, and in 1995 they put out their first issue. Somewhere along the lines between 1995 to 1999, Michael and JFK Jr. had a split. And then JFK Jr.'s name was the only one on top of the co-founder, and Michael Berman's name was moved to the bottom. When you consider what JFK Jr.'s purpose was for George, which might have been a different purpose than what Michael Berman's purpose was, is it any wonder why the two of them might have had a split? Perhaps they had different visions of where the magazine should go. And so I was looking into this timing just because I was curious. I was looking into the timing of when this split happened and what issue was the first issue that only JFK Jr.'s name was at the top of the staff list. So let's look into this. I went into my America's Reluctant Prince book by Stephen Gillen, and I read this part again. And I also did a little more research, but let me start with this. This is from chapter 9. Mom and Dad are fighting again, editors whispered when Michael and John erupted during one of their many spirited battles. Those who witnessed the fights blame Michael for provoking John, pointing out that Kennedy was never a hothead with the staff. The senior editor also noted that John never harassed an employee, but Michael did. John and Michael had spent 2 challenging years developing the idea for the magazine, pitching it to advertisers, getting a buyer, and building a staff. Now, after less than a year in business, they unleashed heated battle after battle on the office floor. After the first 2 issues, Berman grew critical of the entire editorial staff and their choices about which stories to publish. Channeling feedback from advertisers and reader surveys, he charged that the magazine was too formulaic. Since it lacked quality control and clear editorial direction, George seemed to be reinventing itself with every issue. Nonpartisan politics doesn't mean politics light, he insisted, thinly disguising a model for the cover, whether it was Cindy Crawford, Robert De Niro, or basketball star Charles Barkley, was interesting at the outset but quickly became gimmicky. It was worth noting, however, that while Berman was always ready to criticize John and his editorial staff, no one at the magazine recalled him ever offering an alternative direction. John nixed the few ideas that Berman did offer. In one case, Michael suggested that John interview first daughter Chelsea Clinton, then 16, a move that he thought would represent the kind of unique perspective that George could bring by having one presidential child talking to another. John rejected the idea. He had not forgotten his mother's counsel. When Hillary Clinton asked Mrs. Onassis for advice on how to raise a child in the White House, Jackie suggested never allowing Chelsea to talk to the press. At another point, Berman proposed that they create an advisory board composed of editors and writers who could make suggestions. Absolutely not, John responded. I don't need other people. I have enough people weighing in. I don't need more. The early conflict highlighted one of the many questions facing the young magazine. Michael had come up with the original idea of a publication that blended politics and pop culture. John quickly grasped the possibilities, and together they had successfully sold the concept to Hachette. But they had still not solved the problem that plagued the magazine from the very beginning, a clear strategy to identify the intersection between culture and politics and to strike the balance between hard-hitting, newsworthy stories and lighthearted, gossipy fare. They struggled, as any magazine would in the early stages of life, to populate George with stories and photos that drove home to readers the true purpose of the magazine. But Berman blamed John for failing to provide the staff with sufficient guidance to ensure that they stayed true to the original concept. He thought the first issue came close to fulfilling this innovative concept, but then George quickly lost its way. Over time, he complained, it became very inconsistent. It became what others thought a political magazine would be. It missed the types of stories that grabbed headlines. The magazine lacked a clear vision, he concluded, and I blame him for that because that's what he should have provided. Berman's criticism angered John, who found the comments biting and the tone harsh. Those who observed their exchanges described Michael as taunting and disrespectful. For many reasons, the two men found it impossible to sit down and have a measured, professional discussion of their differences. Many of their arguments spilled outside of their offices. Even if a quarrel began in Berman's office, it would intensify as Michael furiously pursued John down the hallway. One editor recalled Michael walking a few feet behind Kennedy, belittling him in a voice loud enough for bystanders to hear. "Who's going to save you now that your mother's not here?" John would try to ignore him, but Michael persisted. "You're nothing. You're a loser." Eventually, John would lose control, leading to shouting and shoving. Michael's tone was regrettable, and most of those who worked at the magazine blamed him for instigating many of the arguments. But there was some truth to his criticism. The sales and ad buys for the first 2 issues were unique, driven by the media buzz surrounding John's entry into the business and propped up by Carmody's decision to require advertisers to buy the same number of ads at the same price for both the first and second issues. Michael knew that beginning with the 3rd issue, they would have to renegotiate ad prices, and he was hearing grumbling from advertisers about the future direction of the magazine. Those who observed John daily noticed an evolution as he finally became more confident about his own instincts. He no longer needed Michael to manage his public image, nor did he feel it necessary to consult Berman about whom he planned to interview or whether he intended to do a radio interview or a talk show appearance. He also found other people to assume some of the responsibilities that Michael had adopted in the past. Berman, who for a decade had played the bad cop, now found his role usurped by the tough-talking and fiercely loyal Rose Marie. She had become the person who said no to requests and who took the blame for John's mistakes. John knew that Rosie, as he called her, had no agenda other than to protect him. While John appreciated Michael's advice and trusted his intuition, he came to resent his partner's efforts to micromanage him. He felt that Berman was no longer just offering advice, he was issuing demands. That aggressiveness did not sit well with John. There was nothing John disliked more than being managed and being put in a box, recalled Rose Marie. After the 4th issue, John told Berman to stop attending editorial meetings because he felt Michael was undermining staff morale and challenging his authority as the editor-in-chief. "If you want to talk to me about it, we can have a meeting," John said to him. Berman agreed, and they decided to touch base twice a month, usually every other Tuesday at 12:30. One meeting would be to discuss editorial, the other to review reader surveys. At their first meeting, John became defensive when Berman criticized editorial, and they ended with no progress made. In their next scheduled meeting, Berman invited John to lunch in a more informal atmosphere. "Oh, I can't have the meeting today," John said about 10 minutes beforehand. "I have a doctor's appointment." Berman went to a restaurant across the street from the office only to find John having lunch with a staff member. "Basically, he totally shut me out of the editorial," Michael recalled. Berman understood John's magnetism, but he assumed mistakenly that behind the closed doors of a magazine he co-founded, the staff would treat them as equals. In his mind, he never received that treatment, even when it was unequivocally deserved. Initially, the staff had nothing against Michael. Over time, however, those who would have been his natural allies turned against him because of the way he treated them. "I gravitated away from Michael because he scared me," said Matt Berman. "He forced us to choose sides." Most senior staff members described Berman as arrogant, abrasive, and controlling. They complained that Michael, feeling cut off from the natural flow of information, circled the floor quizzing editors, trying to ascertain whether they were loyal to him or to John. When Michael could not find John, he would confront editors, barging into their offices and asking, truth time, where's John? Where is he? Tell me where he is." On one occasion, a senior editor was holding a job interview when Michael tried forcing open her door, demanding information about John. However, the problem went far beyond personality clashes and staff intrigue. More fundamentally, John and Michael had different expectations about how their relationship should evolve now that they were running the magazine. Michael wanted their roles to remain the same, in which he and John would get together and make all major decisions, even though many more people would be in the office. He even had his title changed from publisher to president, assuming that the new role would justify his involvement in all aspects of the magazine. John, on the other hand, wanted Michael, regardless of his title, to shoulder all the responsibilities of being the publisher, while he took control of editorial. This was an arrangement common at most magazines. It was the standard church versus state conflict, noted a senior editor. John did not tell Michael how to sell ads, and he expected him to stay out of his side of the business. Berman assumed that he would continue to be the gatekeeper, controlling access and the flow of information to John. He also planned to continue his role as John's handler, overseeing every detail of his public life. Unlike the new editors who were willing to ignore John's short attention span and his nonchalant handling of important issues, Michael insisted on asserting that authority even further. "I knew many of John's strengths and his weaknesses," he recalled, "and I believe that together we could have controlled the direction of the magazine had it not been for all the other voices weighing in." One day in February, John marched into Michael's office and grabbed the folder on his desk containing all the documents related to a deal he was working on. He then declared, "We are not doing any of this." As they struggled over the folder, John tugged at Berman's shirt and ripped his cuff. "This is it," he shouted at Michael. I'll be the editor and you can be the publisher. That's the way it's going to be. Berman retorted that John had better come up with a good reason for canceling the negotiations. I took care of it, John stated coldly. I told them that you were doing this behind my back. With that, all of Berman's frustrations with John and Carolyn boiled over. When you come in the office, you're unrecognizable, he hollered. You're exhausted, you're unfocused, whatever your problems, keep them at home. Don't let them spill over into the office. That's all I ask. Michael then ripped into Carolyn, repeating his familiar refrain, get her the hell out of the office. John, caught off guard by Michael's accusations and seemingly unrelated attack on his wife, rushed to her defense. You have no idea, he shouted back. That's not true. Don't say that about her. She has legitimate friends in this office. He told Berman that he was jealous because they liked her but did not like him. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Why would you try to ruin that? I can't tell her what to do. Berman snapped. Her behavior is deplorable, he shouted. Stunned, John turned and ran out of Michael's office, but Berman followed close behind. All of the fierce arguments that Michael and John had had in the past, this one was by far the loudest and most intense. To those who witnessed the scene, Berman appeared out of control. He stood outside John's office, roaring, "Open the fucking door! Open this door!" He then grabbed a letter opener from Rosemary's desk and tried picking the lock. Michael claims to have no recollection of what happened after failing to gain entry into John's office, but according to multiple sources, before Berman fled the area, he confiscated John's appointment calendar from Rosemary's desk. Do you fucking believe this? Michael grumbled as he passed by Matt Berman. He ripped my shirt. Somehow John pulled himself together and immediately returned to business as usual. He called to have the lock changed on his door and then, as if nothing had happened, held an editorial meeting with Rich Blow and Biz Mitchell a few minutes later. While they talked in his office, the locksmith started removing the old lock cylinder and installing a new one. Suddenly, Michael reappeared and instructed the locksmith to change his lock too. John managed to get his lock changed with a simple phone call. His co-founder was told he needed to submit a work order. Michael stomped away, only to return a few minutes later to plead his case to the locksmith. Why can't you just do it, he asked. Why can't you just change my lock? The man held his ground, emphasizing again that he would need the proper paperwork. Maybe I'll call David Pecker then, Michael threatened. According to Blow, John's face was filled with rage. He dared Michael to make the call, knowing that such a move would only make Michael appear small and petty. Meanwhile, Rosemary was pacing nervously outside the office, searching for John's appointment book. She confronted Michael, who denied taking it. After a few minutes, though, he showed up holding it. Here, you left this in my office, he muttered, before tossing it on Rose's desk. It's unclear why Berman would have needed John's calendar. Perhaps seizing his calendar represented a last desperate effort to assert control over John. Berman retreated to his office, knowing that his friendship with John was now officially over and that he could no longer remain at George. Michael never spoke with John again. So as early as February 1996, John and Michael were having arguments about the direction of the magazine. But what I find extremely interesting, and you just can't make this stuff up, is that when I went back and looked through the magazines in sequential order, numbered 1 through 57, because there's 57 total issues of George, guess which issue was the first one that John Kennedy's name appeared at the top alone without Michael Berman? You guessed it, issue number 17. That's the first issue where John Kennedy Jr.'s name was at the top alone as the co-founder, and Michael Berman's name was at the bottom. You just can't make this stuff up. You just can't. Issue number 17 out of 57 is the first one that John Kennedy Jr.'s name is at the top without Michael Berman. Crazy. So now you know the story of John Kennedy Jr., Michael Berman, and issue number 17. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, And there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.